Why did her hands feel heavier on the wheel than they had in a war zone? The asphalt stretched ahead in an endless, sun-baked ribbon, but Kate Ryan barely saw it. Fort Carson rose in the distance, jagged outlines of hangars and barracks shimmering in the heat like a mirage she wasn't sure she wanted to reach. Her Jeep's tires hummed steadily, the sound almost soothing if not for the knot in her chest. At 42, after 10 years of pretending she was just another face in the civilian world, she was coming back, back to the uniforms, the salutes, the ghosts she'd buried under layers of quiet anonymity. The radio crackled with news about Afghanistan. She turned it down. Too much noise. Too many memories. Silence had been her companion for a decade, and it was easier that way. The sun hung merciless over Colorado's scrubby prairie, baking the dust and cedar into something that almost smelled like Helmand Province if you closed your eyes. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, scarred knuckles whitening, remembering a sandstorm that had felt like the end of the world. She had dressed deliberately this morning. Faded BDUs, soft from years of washing, boots scuffed by 1,000 miles walked in service to something bigger than herself. No rank. No patches. Those were locked away in a footlocker she hadn't opened in years. A civilian contractor, that's all she was supposed to be now, brought in under the radar to train the next generation of combat medics before they shipped off to the places that had nearly broken her. The invitation had come with polite formality. Sergeant Major Angela Martinez, endorsed by Colonel James Harrison himself. It should have been simple: train, leave, forget. The checkpoint came into view, and with it, a prickle of unease. The guards were kids, most of them probably born after her first deployment. They took her credentials, eyed her uniform. "Ma'am, you'll need to check in at Building 1430, the private said, handing back the ID. "And, just so you know, civilian contractors aren't supposed to wear military utilities on base." Kate nodded. She didn't argue. The rules were the rules. But she also knew those BDUs would matter when she was demonstrating field procedures. They'd promised her an exception. Still, the weight of their stares clung to her as she drove through the gates. Inside the base, life moved with the precision of a practiced cadence. Squads jogging past in formation, their sergeant's voice echoing off concrete. A pair of Blackhawks idled on the flight line, rotor blades glinting. Somewhere beyond those barracks, she imagined young medics, faces still unlined by war, eager to prove themselves. The administrative building's steel and glass facade reflected a sky so blue it almost hurt. Kate slung her duffel over one shoulder, folder tucked under her arm, and stepped into a lobby buzzing with the clipped tones of military routine. She gave her name clearly: Kate Ryan. Appointment with Sergeant Major Martinez. The specialist at the desk, Wilson, his name tag read, typed briskly, glanced at her, then at his screen. "Appointments confirmed," he said, then hesitated. "But ma'am, about the uniform." She felt the subtle hush ripple through the room. Conversations paused. A group of junior officers at a bulletin board looked up. It was such a small thing, a contractor in faded fatigues, but it was enough to draw attention. A young lieutenant stepped forward, tall, late 20s, crisp bearing, M4 slung across his chest. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Roberts," he said, polite but firm. "The uniform represents something significant. Only those on active duty should wear it." The words hung there, no malice, just duty. Still, they pierced deeper than they should have. Kate kept her voice even. "I understand completely, Lieutenant. Is there a place I can change?" He gestured down a hallway. "Restroom that way. I'll wait to escort you." She found the restroom empty, cool and quiet. The fluorescent light was harsh against the mirror as she set her duffel on the bench. As she peeled off her BDU blouse, the tan t-shirt beneath came free, revealing, for just a moment, the tattoo across her shoulders. Angel wings wrapped around a combat medic's cross, a date inscribed beneath, 2/14/2009. Sandstorm. It wasn't art from some parlor. It was a memorial, inked by a ranger she'd saved, a promise etched into her skin when she still believed she could outrun the memories. The door swung open unexpectedly. "Ma'am, I brought—" Roberts froze. The stack of towels in his hand slipped, scattering across the tile. His eyes locked on the tattoo, recognition flashing like a spark before confusion and awe followed. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then, flustered, Roberts stammered, I apologize," and backed out, closing the door gently as though afraid to wake a sleeping giant. Kate stared at her reflection. The mask of her civilian life had slipped in seconds. The desert angel, that whispered name she'd never claimed, was now on someone's lips again. By the time she emerged, Roberts was waiting stiffly, but his eyes were different, less skeptical, almost reverent. A weathered Master Sergeant Davidson, by his name tag, had joined him. "Captain Ryan," Davidson said quietly, using a rank she hadn't heard in years. "Colonel Harrison requests your presence." Captain, the word was a knife twisted in old scars. She followed without comment, aware of eyes tracking her as she passed. The corridor seemed longer than it was. They led her through a secure checkpoint, Davidson scanning his biometrics without breaking stride. He glanced at her once, the look of a man holding a secret. "I was in Cunnar in '08, he murmured. "Heard stories about Helmand. Never thought I'd meet the angel in person." Kate kept her gaze forward. "I'm here to train medics, that's all." The oak door to Colonel Harrison's office loomed like a judgment. Inside, sunlight cut across a desk stacked with classified folders. Harrison, tall and silver-haired, carried the weight of decades of command in his posture. Beside him stood Sergeant Major Angela Martinez, compact, sharp-eyed, a woman whose presence filled the room without a word. "Captain Ryan," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair. "Sir," she replied, remaining standing. "I haven't held that rank in 10 years. Harrison exchanged a look with Martinez. "Let's say your status is complicated." He slid a folder toward her, top secret markings glaring in the light. "Lieutenant Roberts saw your tattoo. He recognized the date." Kate said nothing. "Scott's here," Martinez added. "He doesn't know yet, but he was one of the 23, and Roberts has been debriefed." Kate exhaled slowly. "I wanted to pass on what I learned and disappear again, quietly." "It might not be possible anymore," Harrison said. He leaned forward, his voice softer now, almost haunted. "I was in Helmand, February 14, 2009. Operation Sandstorm. We walked into a perfect ambush, lost all our medics in the first minutes. Medevac couldn't reach us. I was bleeding out when reports came of a lone medic working in the storm." He met her eyes. "I never saw your face, but I read the reports. 4 hours and 17 minutes. 23 lives." Her jaw tightened. "Those reports exaggerate." "No," Harrison said simply, "they don't." The room was heavy with memories none of them could name aloud. The war wasn't just in some far desert anymore. It was here, sitting between them in dress shoes and polished wood. Harrison straightened. "The Pentagon wants you to proceed with the training under civilian cover, but keep your head down. If word spreads too far, this entire mission is compromised." Kate opened the folder. Inside, advanced trauma training scenarios, mass casualties, equipment failures, enemy fire, all the nightmares she'd lived through once already. She closed the folder. "I'll do it, but no sanitized exercises. These medics need the truth." Martinez nodded. "They'll have it." That night in her temporary quarters, Kate unpacked her old medical kit. The weight of the tourniquets and modified tools felt like a confession. Her phone buzzed, an encrypted text, "Situation report required. Has cover been maintained?" She typed "minor compromise, contained, proceeding." The reply came instantly, "Pentagon monitoring, complete mission quickly, extract plan in place." She set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would stand in front of 12 young faces, some skeptical, some eager, and begin the slow, careful transfer of knowledge bought with blood. And somewhere behind those barracks walls, whispers would begin again. The desert angel. she's here." The Colorado night pressed in around her. Kate closed her eyes and breathed, steady and quiet. There were still 12 days to honor the 12 she couldn't save, 12 days to make sure their deaths meant something. But deep down, she knew, secrets don't stay buried forever, and once a storm starts rolling across the desert, it's only a matter of time before the wind finds its way back home. Why did their faces shift from curiosity to doubt the moment she stepped into the simulation room? The 12 medics stood in formation at 800 sharp, uniforms crisp, boots aligned perfectly. But their eyes, some skeptical, some openly dismissive, followed Kate Ryan like a silent jury. She wasn't wearing fatigues today. Civilian tactical pants, a contractor's polo shirt. No insignia, no rank. To them, she was just another contractor the Army had hired to run them through textbook drills. Jason Gray, the tallest, leaned back slightly in the front row, his arms loose but his jaw tight, a man who didn't bother to hide his initial judgment. Beside him, Sarah Hernandez's posture was impeccable, her dark eyes steady and focused. A few rows back, Michael Scott's expression was unreadable. He watched her like someone trying to fit an image into a half-forgotten dream. "At ease," Kate said, her voice cutting through the stale classroom air with a command edge she hadn't planned to use. Some habits didn't fade. The subtle shift in their shoulders, muscle memory, was almost imperceptible. "I'm Kate Ryan. For the next 2 weeks, you'll be under my instruction for advanced trauma training under combat conditions." She set her old medical kit on the table. The canvas was faded, seams worn, but every stain and scuff told a story none of them yet knew. "Ground rules," she continued. 1. Nothing we do here will be perfect. Combat never is. 2. Question everything, including me, if you believe there's a better way. 3. Understand this, your textbook will not save you when your equipment fails, when the radio dies, or when the person bleeding out on the ground is your closest friend. Gray raised his hand before she finished. "Ma'am, what's your background? I mean, no disrespect, but most civilian contractors haven't treated casualties under fire." His tone was polite. The challenge beneath it was. Kate kept her gaze steady. "Afghanistan, 2007 to 2010. Forward operating bases, convoy support, and a few assignments I can't discuss. I've treated trauma you won't find in any manual." "A lot of people served in Afghanistan," Gray said. "What makes your experience different?" For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Instead of answering, Kate crossed to the environmental controls. Without warning, she plunged the room into simulated chaos. Lights dimmed to the eerie half-light of dawn, speakers roared with distant explosions and rotor blades, heat surged to mimic an Afghan summer. 4 mannequins rose from recessed platforms, each with catastrophic wounds. "Your convoy's been hit by an IED," she said, voice calm, sharp. 4 wounded, limited supplies, radio damaged. Medevac, 15 minutes out, weather turning. Move." The medics froze, then scrambled. Gray and Hernandez tackled the chest and abdominal trauma cases. Scott and Rodriguez dragged a simulated amputee behind cover. Within minutes, Kate introduced malfunctions. A suction device failed. A pressure bandage split. The room filled with the desperate, frustrated energy of young medics confronting their own limits. "Hernandez, your patient's airway is blocked," Kate called. "Your suction's dead, what now?" Hernandez's brows knitted. She glanced around, her breath quick. Improvisation wasn't in the manuals. Then she snatched a water bottle, cut it with her knife, and rigged a manual suction. "Good," Kate said softly. Across the room, Gray cursed under his breath. His casualty was bleeding out, but the standard bandages were gone. He pressed uselessly against the wound. "Without the right gear, there's nothing." "Show me," Kate said, kneeling beside him. With quick, fluid movements, she tore strips of uniform, applied pressure points he hadn't considered, and secured a makeshift bandage. The bleeding slowed. "The right gear is a luxury," she said. "Knowing why something works, that's survival." By the time the medevac simulation arrived, the room was drenched in heat and adrenaline. The medics gathered around her, their skepticism frayed by what they'd just witnessed. Sarah Hernandez spoke first. "That airway technique, did you learn that in training?" "Experience," Kate replied simply. Gray, still catching his breath, looked down, ashamed of his earlier doubt. "That pressure point trick, I've never seen it." "A Navy corpsman showed me in Kandahar," she said. "We'd lost our supplies to an RPG. He saved 3 men with nothing but ingenuity." The lesson landed without fanfare. No lecture could have driven it home like those 15 chaotic minutes. Later in Harrison's office, Davidson closed the door quietly. "Sir, she's incredible." "I know," Harrison said, watching the training footage freeze on Kate improvising under pressure. "She's also recognized," Davidson added. "Scott's been asking questions. The whispers are spreading." Harrison's jaw tightened. Outside, the Colorado sky darkened with the promise of an afternoon storm. That evening, Kate stood alone on her balcony. The sun bled orange across the horizon, painting the base in familiar colors. The day had gone well, better than she dared hope, but the air felt fragile. Secrets had a way of seeping through cracks. Her phone buzzed. "They're talking about the tattoo. D." She stared at the message from Davidson, then at the horizon. 11 more days. 11 days to teach them everything before the past caught up. The next morning broke brutal and bright, the heat already climbing past 100 degrees by mid-morning. Dust rose around their boots as Kate led the 12 medics across the outdoor training grounds, their M9 medical packs digging into their shoulders. "In Afghanistan," she called over her shoulder, "this would count as a cool morning." Hernandez managed a faint laugh. Gray just grunted. Even Scott, usually unflappable, squinted against the sun. Ahead, instructors positioned mannequins behind rocky outcroppings. Smoke grenades marked a landing zone. Red targets on distant ridgelines signaled enemy snipers. Kate gathered the team under a low wall for the briefing. "Your patrol's been ambushed by snipers. 4 casualties scattered across 100 meters of contested ground. 2 fire teams are pinned down. You cannot rely on cover fire. Your job: reach, stabilize, evacuate." Scott frowned. "Ma'am, without security, that's near impossible." "Yes," Kate said simply, "and yet it's happened more than once. Impossible is sometimes your job description." She sketched movement patterns in the dust. "Alpha Team, Gray, Hernandez, Rodriguez, Phillips, East Sector. Bravo, Scott, Martinez, Johnson, Patel, West Sector. Charlie and Delta provide limited cover and prep the LZ. Short bursts. Identify cover before you move. Visual contact at all times." They nodded grimly, checking gear. The nervous energy among them was electric. At her signal, chaos erupted. Simulated rifle fire cracked. Smoke drifted. Voices of wounded soldiers called for help. Gray's team moved fast, but in his urgency, he exposed himself crossing open ground. Kate triggered his sensor. One sharp tone and he was down. "Gray's bleeding out," she shouted. "Arterial bleed. Hernandez, you're in charge." Hernandez swallowed hard but reacted instantly, redirecting her team. She clamped the tourniquet with precise hands, her voice calm as she reassigned roles. Kate knelt beside her. "Good response, but now you're short a medic. What's your plan?" "Rodriguez on security," Hernandez said quickly. "Phillips helps me move Gray. Then we split and retrieve the others through those ditches." "Execute." Across the field, Scott's team faced its own nightmare. A mannequin presenting a tension pneumothorax, but the decompression kit had been deliberately damaged. Scott scanned the wreckage around him, then improvised: a 14-gauge needle, a chest seal wrapper, medical tape. One quick motion and the lung decompressed. "Unorthodox," Kate said as she appeared beside him. "Effective." "Learned it in Afghanistan," Scott replied, eyes narrowing. "At least, that's what they told me after I woke up." Her pulse spiked. He was closer now. She stepped back before he could study her face too long. 2 grueling hours later, the teams limped back to the staging area, uniforms soaked, faces streaked with dust. As she passed out water bottles, Kate read the change in their eyes. The skepticism was gone. They'd begun to understand. During debrief, she asked, "Gray, what did you learn?" He wiped his brow. "Being the casualty changes everything, makes you see mistakes you'd miss otherwise, and I underestimated you." Hernandez. "Leadership transitions can't wait for comfort," she said, voice quiet but firm. "And I need to keep the whole picture in my head, not just the wound in front of me." Kate nodded, then turned to Scott. "Your improvisation saved your casualty. Explain your thought process." He drank from his canteen, watching her carefully. "Pressure equalization. Understand the physiology and the tools become optional. And sometimes," he paused, his voice edged with meaning, "survival depends on one person doing the impossible." The words lingered. Kate felt the storm clouds building again, not just outside, but inside this fragile cover story. After dismissal, Davidson approached her quietly. "Colonel Harrison wants to see you. Chatter's growing, be ready." The march back to base was silent, fatigue and unease weighing heavier than their packs. Behind her, she heard Scott whisper to Gray and Hernandez, "I think I know who she really is." Inside Harrison's office, thunder rolled over the mountains. Harrison activated the room's security systems and didn't waste time. "Your identity is a topic of discussion now." Scott's piecing it together. Kate stayed silent. The storm outside cracked lightning across the horizon, a perfect echo of the tension filling the room. "You have 2 options," Harrison said. "We extract you tonight, or we risk staying the course." Kate thought of the medics' faces, their eagerness, their doubt turning to belief. She thought of the 12 she couldn't save, and she thought of the pilot she'd transfused her own blood to under a collapsing sky. She met Harrison's gaze. "We finished the mission." Why did the storm outside seem calmer than the one building in Michael Scott's eyes? Kate arrived at the simulation facility before dawn, mist clinging to the training grounds. The world hushed except for the occasional distant hum of a generator. She hoped for solitude, to prepare the day's scenarios, to steady herself before the whispers turned into something louder. But Scott was already there, crouched beside a trauma mannequin, adjusting straps on a splint with the care of a man who needed to keep his hands busy. "Staff Sergeant," Kate said evenly. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Morning, ma'am. Just making sure yesterday's damaged equipment isn't going to fail again." Kate set her kit on the control panel. "That improvisation you pulled off yesterday saved your casualty. Good instincts." He stood, wiping his hands on his fatigues. "Instincts or memories?" His tone was quiet, almost casual, but the weight beneath it was. She didn't respond immediately, pretending to focus on programming the day's simulation. The room's ambient hum seemed suddenly too loud. "You know," he continued, "I've had these dreams for years. Helmand Province, February 2009. I was unconscious most of the time, but sometimes I see flashes. A sandstorm so thick I could barely breathe. And someone's voice, steady, calm, telling me I wasn't going to die." Kate kept her back to him. "Trauma memories often blend reality and imagination. Your mind fills gaps to help you heal." Scott took a step closer. "Funny thing is, Johnson remembers the same voice. So does Matthews. Different men, different angles, same story. A woman, moving through a storm, saving lives while the world was falling apart." Kate felt her throat tighten but forced her voice to stay level. "We should focus on the training. The others will be here soon." He stopped beside her, close enough that she could see the faint scar running from his shoulder to his collarbone. "Roberts told me about the tattoo. Medical cross, angel wings, the date. You could say that's a coincidence, but there aren't many coincidences like that." She finally turned, meeting his gaze. "Be careful, Staff Sergeant. Curiosity can get people hurt." His jaw flexed, but he didn't press further. "Understood, ma'am." By the time the trainees arrived, the tension between them had settled like static in the room, unseen but palpable. Hernandez noticed it first, her eyes flicking between them during the pre-brief. Gray sensed it too, though he misread it as friction between instructor and soldier. Kate's voice remained calm, authoritative as she outlined the day's scenario. A mass casualty evacuation under collapsing communications, compounded by environmental hazards. But her mind kept drifting, to the tattoo on her back, to the way Scott had said voice, to the sandstorm that had swallowed a generation of soldiers whole. The simulation began without warning. The room plunged into chaos, sirens wailing, simulated gunfire crackling through speakers, smoke filling the space until visibility dropped to mere feet. The medics split into teams, voices sharp with urgency. Kate moved among them like a phantom, observing, testing, introducing failures they hadn't anticipated. A tourniquet snapped. A radio cut out mid-report. A casualty worsened without warning, forcing triage decisions under impossible time pressure. Hernandez froze for half a heartbeat when her patient's vital signs plummeted on the monitor. "Hernandez," Kate barked. I need to reassess." Hernandez snapped out of it, adjusting her plan, her hands steadier now. Gray, meanwhile, found himself pinned between two critical patients. "Rodriguez, swap with me. No, wait." His voice cracked with the strain of too many choices. Scott's voice cut through the noise. "Prioritize the airway, Gray. Rodriguez, pressure on the femoral bleed. Move." Kate caught the flicker of leadership in his tone. Battlefield clarity earned the hard way. It was the same voice she'd heard that night in Helmand, bleeding out but still directing fire until his strength failed. When the evac arrived, represented by instructors with stretchers, the room was a haze of smoke, sweat, and exhaustion. The trainees slumped against the walls, their faces streaked with grime. Kate handed out water bottles. "What did we learn?" "Everything breaks," Gray muttered. "And adapt," Hernandez said quietly. "Always adapt," Scott added, his eyes still on Kate. The afternoon brought another test, but this time it wasn't planned. The base-wide alert blared suddenly, a jarring, electronic wail that cut through the ordinary bustle of Fort Carson. "Attention all personnel. This is not a drill. Medevac assets requested for aircraft down. Coordinates Sierra Echo 337,492. All qualified medical personnel report to staging area Charlie." For a second nobody moved, then Kate's voice snapped them into action. "Secure your equipment, real-world gear. Move." The trainees scrambled, adrenaline spiking in a way simulations could never replicate. Colonel Harrison was already at the staging area, barking orders to security teams and scanning weather data. A Blackhawk had gone down 15 miles northeast, wind shear during a freak snowstorm. 8 personnel on board. "We're sending a ground team," Harrison said. "Weather's too bad for additional air support. Captain Ryan, your point for medical. Take Scott, Gray, and Hernandez." Within minutes, they were in a tactical vehicle, barreling toward the mountains. Snow fell heavier as the road climbed, turning the world white. Scott, in the passenger seat, glanced sidelong at Kate. "Conditions like these feels familiar, doesn't it?" Kate didn't answer. Her hands gripped the wheel harder as visibility dropped. When the road ended in a drift too deep to cross, they abandoned the vehicle and continued on foot. Packs bit into their shoulders, boots crunching through knee-deep snow. The wind howled like something alive. The helicopter came into view through the swirling white, a dark carcass on its side, rotor blades shattered. Kate's heart tightened. The scene was too close to other wreckage she'd crawled through, too close to another storm. "Establish a perimeter," she ordered. "Hernandez with me for initial triage. Scott, Gray, prep stretchers and extraction gear." Inside, the crash site was chaos. The pilot was conscious but bleeding from a head wound, spine possibly compromised. The co-pilot's legs were mangled, bone jutting where metal had crushed them. A crew chief struggled to breathe, collapsed lung. Others groaned, shocky but alive. Kate worked methodically, voice steady even as the storm whipped snow into her face. Hernandez, IV on the co-pilot. Gray immobilized the pilot's spine. Scott, chest decompression now. Scott didn't hesitate. Decompression kit's damaged. Improvise, Kate said. He did 14-gauge needle wrapper tape, just as she taught him. When a patient's blood pressure plummeted, Kate's hands moved on instinct, rigging a pressure infuser from a blood pressure cuff and an IV bag. Gray stared in awe. Where did you learn that? Experience, she replied, voice flat, focused. 3 brutal hours later, every crash victim was stabilized. The base rescue team arrived to finish the extraction. As they secured the pilot onto a stretcher, he reached out weakly, fingers clutching Kate's wrist. I know you, he whispered. Helmand Sandstorm, you're the one. Kate gently removed his hand. You've got a concussion, Captain, rest. But Scott had heard. Their eyes met across the wreckage. Recognition bloomed in his face, not doubt, not a guess, but certainty. The hike back was grueling. The stretchers sank into drifts, shoulders ached. But the weight pressing on Kate wasn't the snow or the gear. It was Scott's gaze on her back, the unspoken truth closing in like the storm. At Fort Carson, Harrison waited. Good work, he said, his voice grave. Debrief at 800, get some rest. As Gray and Hernandez trudged off, Scott lingered. Harrison's eyes flicked between them, reading the unspoken tension. My office, now. The secure conference room was already humming with counter-surveillance measures. Davidson stood by the wall. Dr. Robert Shaw, the medical simulation director, sat quietly. And a woman in her early 60s, distinguished, with 2 stars on her uniform, watched Kate like a hawk. Captain Ryan, Harrison said. Staff Sergeant Scott. This is Major General Eleanor Hayes, Special Operations Command. Hayes' gaze was sharp but not unkind. Captain, your reputation precedes you. Kate felt the weight of the uniform she wasn't wearing. Ma'am. Hayes turned to Scott. Staff Sergeant, I understand you've connected some dots. Scott straightened. Yes, ma'am. She's the combat medic who saved my life and 22 others during Operation Sandstorm, the Desert Angel. Hayes didn't look surprised. What you've discovered is classified at the highest level. The Pentagon is concerned. The crash site recognition, your conversations, it's only a matter of time before this spreads. Scott's jaw clenched. With respect, ma'am, she's the reason I'm alive. Half the survivors have been searching for her for 6 years. We deserve the truth. Deserving isn't the issue, Hayes replied coolly. Operational security is. Harrison stepped in. General, these medics are learning techniques that could save countless lives. Terminating the program now would be a mistake. Kate stood silent, letting the argument swirl around her. She had carried this secret alone for a decade, believing anonymity was part of the deal she'd made with herself and the Pentagon. But looking at Scott, at the scar on his shoulder, the gratitude in his voice, she felt the cost of silence pressing in. Hayes studied her. Captain, your assessment. Kate's voice was steady. If you extract me now, you'll get your operational security, but you'll also send 12 medics into war less prepared than they could be. Let me finish the mission. Control the narrative. Don't erase it. Hayes didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked to Harrison, then to Davidson, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Very well, Hayes said finally. I'll consult with General Thompson. Until then, Captain, you're restricted to base. Staff Sergeant, you're ordered to maintain silence. Not one word to anyone. Scott nodded stiffly. Understood, ma'am. As the room emptied, he lingered by the door. 6 years, he said quietly to Kate. We've been looking for you for 6 years. Kate met his gaze, the storm inside her finally breaking just a little. The mission required silence. "Maybe," Scott said, "but silence doesn't save lives, you did." She looked away before he could see the flicker of emotion in her eyes. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the air still smelled of storms, reminding her that even the fiercest weather eventually clears, leaving only what it uncovered behind. Why did the sunrise feel like a spotlight she wasn't ready to stand beneath? The next morning, Fort Carson woke to a cold, brittle dawn. Frost clung to the edges of Humvee windshields, and the mountains wore a thin veil of cloud like a secret they weren't willing to share. Kate stood outside the barracks before reveille, watching her breath curl in the air. Sleep had been shallow. Every creak of the building had felt like a memory clawing its way back. She could feel the weight of Scott's certainty pressing against her back even though he wasn't there. The conversation in Harrison's office the night before had left her hollow but also oddly lighter, as if the inevitable was finally catching up. The Desert Angel wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a woman walking the same ground as the Whispers. The trainees filed into the mess hall in small groups, laughter low, voices cracking with fatigue. Hernandez spotted Kate and raised a hand in greeting. Gray avoided her eyes, too aware now of the growing legend that had entered their orbit. Scott trailed last, his expression unreadable but his gaze too sharp to ignore. Breakfast was tense. Someone, Rodriguez maybe, had heard just enough to start rumors. Snippets drifted through the room, Hellman medic, tattoo, and then quick shushes when she entered. Harrison intercepted her at the coffee urn, his own cup steaming. "Pentagon's on edge," he said quietly. "General Hayes is leaning toward extraction if the chatter doesn't die down." Kate sipped her coffee slowly. Extraction would undo everything. They need to see this through. "They're spooked," Harrison admitted. "You know how it works. Once the story takes on a life of its own, control slips." She glanced across the hall at the trainees. Hernandez was showing Rodriguez how to rewrap a bandage for efficiency. Gray sat stiff-backed, probably replaying yesterday's crash in his head. And Scott was watching her with the patience of someone who'd survived worse storms and knew when to wait. After breakfast, Kate led them to the training field. The frost had melted into a slick sheen on the gravel, the air sharp enough to sting their lungs. "Today's focus," she said, her voice even, "is casualty extraction under urban conditions. Tight spaces, limited visibility, improvised evacuation routes. These drills aren't about speed, they're about thinking under pressure." Gray raised a hesitant hand. "Ma'am, before we start, can I ask something?" She braced herself. "Go ahead." "Is it true?" His voice wavered between awe and caution. "Were you there, the sandstorm?" The group went still. Even the wind seemed to hush. Kate let the silence stretch, weighing whether to lie to deflect, to protect the fragile order of this mission. But something in Hernandez's steady eyes, in Scott's quiet faith, made the choice for her. "I was there," she said softly, "but you don't need to know the details. What matters is what you take from this training, what you'll carry when things go wrong." Gray swallowed hard, a flush creeping up his neck. No more questions followed. But the air was different now, reverent, fragile, heavy with possibility. They began the exercise. The simulated urban zone was a maze of shipping containers and abandoned vehicles. Smoke grenades turned alleys into tunnels of choking fog. Kate watched as the medics moved carefully, improvising when doors jammed or casualties proved too heavy for standard carries. She disrupted their comms midway, forcing them to rely on hand signals. Hernandez emerged as a natural leader, her voice calm even when the team splintered under pressure. Gray, chastened by his earlier stumble, volunteered for the most dangerous extractions without hesitation. Scott directed the chaos with unflappable precision, never once looking lost. Halfway through, Kate ducked behind a burned-out vehicle to observe. The sound of boots on gravel and muted shouts echoed around her, blending with memories of another time, another alley, Another smoke screen. She closed her eyes briefly and could almost feel the sting of desert sand against her cheeks. "Ma'am," Scott's voice broke through the memory. He had found her, of course. "You okay?" She opened her eyes. "Fine. You don't have to carry it alone." Her jaw tightened. "I do, that's the point." He didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a spare radio. "We're improvising with one fewer unit. I'll take Alpha's channel." By the end of the drill, the medics were drenched in sweat and dust, their breathing ragged but their eyes alight with a new kind of understanding. Kate gathered them beneath a rusted overhang, the cold wind biting through their jackets. "What you felt today, confusion, frustration, fear, that's normal," she said. "The key isn't to eliminate those feelings, it's to act in spite of them. Fear is information, use it." Hernandez nodded slowly. "I didn't think I could keep track of everyone, but when it mattered, the steps just came." "That's muscle memory," Kate said. "You earn it now, so when it counts, it's there without thinking." Gray stared at the ground. "I froze for a second, thought I'd lost another man, felt like," he stopped, swallowing, "like the real thing." "You froze," Kate said gently, "and then you moved. That's what matters." Later, back in her quarters, Kate stood before the small mirror, unbuttoning her shirt. The tattoo stretched across her shoulders, its lines softened with age but no less vivid. She traced the date with a fingertip. 12 lives she couldn't bring back. 23 she could. The math never balanced. A knock sounded. "Come in," she said. Scott stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." She leaned against the dresser, arms folded. "About what?" "You saved me," he said bluntly. "And you saved Harrison and God knows who else, but you disappeared. No medals, no credit. Why?" "Because war isn't about credit," she said quietly. "It's about survival, and sometimes survival means vanishing so the mission can stay intact." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "We weren't supposed to live, but we did, and we've been looking for the person who gave us that chance." Kate's eyes flickered to the window, where the mountains loomed like sentinels against the fading light. "What would you have done, Scott? Built a statue? Written a book? The men you lost wouldn't have cared." "That's not it," he said. "It's about closure, about knowing the angel in the storm was real." Her throat tightened, but she kept her face composed. She was real. She did her job, and now she's just a contractor teaching medics how not to need an angel. Scott didn't answer. He just nodded, a mixture of frustration and respect in his eyes. That night Harrison called her again. "Hayes is getting calls, word spreading beyond the base." Kate closed her eyes. "We're running out of time." "You'll have to decide soon," Harrison said. "Either disappear again or own it." When the line went dead, she stood in the dark for a long time, staring at the mountains. The wind rattled the window frame like a warning. She thought of the young faces counting on her. She thought of the desert and of the sand that had once whispered through her fingers, "You can't outrun a storm forever." She whispered back to the empty room, "Then let it catch me." Outside, the first stars appeared, small, distant lights piercing the dark. Why was the base so quiet when news always travels loudest in whispers? By morning, Fort Carson's usual rhythms felt off. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when Kate entered a hallway. A pair of young MPs glanced at her tattoo's outline beneath her t-shirt and quickly looked away. Even the cooks in the mess hall stole second looks. What had been a rumor yesterday was now certainty passed quietly from one soldier to another. The Desert Angel was here. Kate kept her movements deliberate. She ate quickly, alone at a corner table. Outside, the sun rose pale and distant, as if even daylight didn't want to draw attention. She knew how fast legends could spiral, how quickly awe turned into scrutiny. At the training grounds, the medics were already waiting. Their postures were different, more upright, more careful, as if they were suddenly in the presence of someone they'd read about in a classified briefing. Gray avoided her eyes entirely. Hernandez's respect deepened, but her curiosity sharpened too. And Scott no longer hid the quiet pride in his expression. Kate addressed them without preamble. Today, you're running a prolonged field care scenario. No evacuation for 12 hours. Supplies limited. You'll need to rotate care, manage pain, and maintain morale under fire. The exercise began in a makeshift shelter of shipping containers and tarps. Simulated gunfire echoed in the distance, timed bursts of thunder adding tension. The medics worked in pairs, voices low, movements efficient. But Kate could feel their glances, their questions hovering unasked. Hernandez approached her during a lull, whispering so the others wouldn't hear. "Ma'am, was it really 23?" Kate didn't flinch. "Numbers don't matter. Focus on the patient in front of you." Hernandez hesitated. "It matters to them, to us, to know someone like you exists." Kate's gaze softened, but her tone stayed firm. "No angel can guarantee survival. You have to be your own miracle when no one's coming." An hour into the exercise, Gray miscalculated a lift and dropped a casualty. The sensor's alarm blared. He froze, panic flashing across his face. "Gray," Kate snapped. "I panicked," he admitted, voice cracking. She crouched beside him, lowering her voice. "You panicked. Good. Panic means you care. Now breathe, fix it. People don't need perfect medics. They need ones who keep moving when perfect fails." Gray's hands steadied. He lifted the casualty again with Hernandez's help. The lesson hit harder than any lecture could. As dusk settled, Harrison arrived at the edge of the training zone. His expression was grim. "Ryan, Hayes needs you in the secure conference room. Now." She handed command to Scott and followed Harrison through the darkening base. The hum of generators and distant rotor blades filled the silence between them. In the conference room, Major General Hayes was waiting, her uniform immaculate, her tone clipped. A large monitor displayed a pentagon seal. Two faces joined via secure feed: General Thompson, stern and cold, and an undersecretary Kate didn't recognize. Hayes opened with no pleasantries. "Captain Ryan, the situation has escalated. Your presence on base has become common knowledge. There's chatter on military forums, someone leaked." Kate kept her voice steady. "Pulling me now compromises the medics' readiness." Thompson's voice cut through the static. "Compromises? Captain, you've compromised us. The Desert Angel was supposed to remain an anonymous asset. Your appearance puts missions at risk." Harrison spoke up. "Sir, with respect, Ryan's training methods are saving lives before they're even on the battlefield. Today alone, she prevented 3 fatal errors in simulation." The undersecretary leaned forward on the feed. "Public perception isn't our only concern. If the media catches wind of Operation Sandstorm's details, it could reopen classified inquiries." Kate's jaw tightened. "You want me invisible so you don't have to face the ghosts of Helmand. But those ghosts are out there, buried under your medals and paperwork. They deserve better." Hayes's eyes flicked with something almost like sympathy before she masked it. "You're out of line, Captain." "No," Kate said quietly. "I'm finally in line with the truth." Silence hung heavy. Thompson's voice softened, though the steel remained. "Finish the program, 2 more days, then you disappear, permanently. No press, no contact, no acknowledgement. Is that understood?" Kate's chest ached with the weight of it, but she nodded once. "Understood." Hayes dismissed the feed. When the screen went dark, she exhaled slowly, the faintest crack in her composed facade. "I'll cover you for the next 48 hours, but if this leaks further—" "It won't come from me," Kate said. Back at her quarters, the night felt colder. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the tattoo-raised edges. She thought of the men she'd carried through the storm, of the voices she'd silenced in her memory to stay sane. And she thought of the 12 medics outside these walls, too young to understand the cost of what they were learning. A soft knock startled her. Scott stepped inside, his face drawn but determined. "They're pulling you, aren't they?" Kate didn't answer directly. 2 days, then I'm gone. His jaw flexed. You deserve better than to vanish again. I deserve peace, she said quietly. He sat across from her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. What you did, what you're doing, it's bigger than secrecy, bigger than politics. These medics, they need to know courage looks like this. Like you. She looked away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Courage isn't mine to claim. It belongs to the ones who didn't come back. For a moment, neither spoke. The base outside was alive with distant laughter, music leaking from a rec room, the low thrum of a passing convoy. Life, messy and imperfect, went on. The next day, Kate pushed the trainees harder. 12-hour drills, night extractions under blackout conditions. She introduced ethical dilemmas: 2 casualties, 1 stretcher, choose. Hernandez hesitated once, then made the hard call. Gray surprised her by volunteering to stay behind in a simulated ambush, his earlier doubt replaced by quiet determination. By evening, they were bone-tired but sharper, the edges of their inexperience honed by adversity. As the medics packed their gear, Hernandez approached Kate. "Ma'am, whatever happens after tomorrow, thank you." Kate's throat tightened. She gave a small nod, then turned away before the emotion could spill. Later that night, she found herself on the training field alone. The sky was a vault of stars, the kind of sky you only notice in quiet places. She crouched, picking up a handful of gravel, letting it trickle through her fingers. The storm she'd been outrunning for 10 years had caught her at last. But instead of rage or fear, she felt something unexpected, a strange, aching relief. Behind her, footsteps crunched. Scott again. "You're still here," he said softly. "For now." He joined her, looking up at the stars. "What do you think happens when they find out the whole story?" She smiled faintly, without humor. "They'll freeze, just like they did when they saw the tattoo." The wind whispered over the empty field, carrying the scent of cedar and snow, Colorado's version of a sandstorm. For the first time in a decade, Kate let herself breathe without bracing for impact. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, or redemption, or both. But for this moment, under this fragile sky, she simply stood. Why did the morning feel borrowed, like a fragile ceasefire before an inevitable storm? Fort Carson awoke beneath a heavy sky, clouds pooling over the mountains in bruised shades of purple and gray. The air was sharp, carrying the faint scent of snow, though it was still autumn. Kate Ryan stood at the edge of the training field, the medics arrayed before her, their breath fogging in the cold. This was supposed to be their final comprehensive exercise, a 12-hour endurance drill under full combat simulation. But for Kate, every breath felt like a countdown. By nightfall tomorrow, she'd be gone. She could sense the tension among them. Gray's jokes were absent. Hernandez's focus was too tight, her movements clipped. Rodriguez fidgeted with a strap on his vest, his nervous energy spilling over. And Scott's expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed a storm. Kate's voice was steady, authoritative. "Today you face the longest scenario yet. No scheduled breaks, no guaranteed evac. You'll rotate leadership, make decisions with incomplete information. You'll experience exhaustion, confusion, and doubt, and you'll learn to act anyway." She laid out the scenario: a convoy ambushed deep in hostile territory, multiple casualties, communications compromised, weather worsening. She gave no map, no rescue timeline, just a starting point and a set of coordinates for wounded spread across miles of rugged terrain. "Remember," she said, letting her gaze sweep across them, "you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. Let's see where you land." The first hours passed in a blur of motion and grit. Hernandez took initial command, her voice steady over the simulated gunfire piped through hidden speakers. Gray surprised her by anticipating movement patterns, using cover cleverly to reach a downed casualty. Rodriguez improvised a splint from a rifle sling and a piece of fence wire. Scott moved between teams, offering quiet corrections without undermining leadership. Kate watched him closely, noting how his calm steadied the group. He reminded her of herself once, before politics and secrecy stripped away the simplicity of doing the right thing in a moment of chaos. As the day stretched on, exhaustion set in. Muscles burned, water ran low, tempers flared. At hour 8, a sudden thunderclap rolled over the mountains and the simulation's environmental systems triggered a downpour of icy rain. Visibility dropped. The ground turned slick. Kate could see morale faltering, shoulders slumping, movement slowing. She stepped into the open, her own clothes soaked through, voice cutting like a blade through the storm. You think the battlefield will wait for you to be ready. It won't. Fear, hunger, cold, they don't care. Keep moving. Hernandez's lips trembled as she hauled Gray up from where he'd slipped. She's right, let's go. At hour 10, a casualty coded. The monitor screamed. Panic flickered in Gray's eyes. He fumbled, his hands clumsy with fatigue. Gray, Kate barked, stepping beside him. Look at me, breathe. What's the first step? He sucked in a breath, blinked rain out of his eyes. Assess, airway first. Then do it. He did, the patient stabilized. By the 12th hour, they stumbled across the final extraction point, mud-caked, freezing, but alive. Kate gathered them beneath a tarp flapping in the wind. Their faces were streaked with dirt and rain, but their eyes burned with something fierce, understanding. You were tested today, she said quietly. Not by me, but by yourselves. The battlefield is just a mirror. It shows you who you are when everything else is stripped away. The words hung in the air, the storm softening to drizzle. Later, as the medics dragged themselves back to the barracks, Harrison appeared at Kate's side. Hayes called, he said. The Pentagon's impatient. If you're going to tell them, it has to be tonight. Kate looked toward the barracks windows glowing warm against the dark. They deserve to hear it from me, not from whispers. Harrison nodded, his expression unreadable. You'll have an audience. That evening she stood in the mess hall turned impromptu briefing room. The trainees sat clustered together, their fatigue softened by curiosity. Harrison and Davidson leaned quietly against the back wall. Hayes stood off to the side, arms crossed, her face a mask of neutrality. Kate began without preamble. You've all heard pieces, you've guessed the rest. Let me set the record straight. The room went still. Even the HVAC hum seemed to fade. Helmand Province, February 2009, she said, her voice low but clear. Operation Sandstorm was supposed to be routine support, move supplies through hostile territory. It wasn't routine. We were ambushed. All our medics were killed in the first minutes. Communications failed. Medevac couldn't reach us. 23 men were bleeding out in a storm so thick you couldn't see your own hands. She paused, the memories sharp and unrelenting. I was a junior captain then, just a medic with no backup, no plan. I moved from one man to the next, using whatever I could find, strips of uniforms, broken gear, even my own blood to transfuse a pilot. For 4 hours and 17 minutes, I was the only thing standing between them and the dark. Hernandez's eyes glistened. Gray's mouth had gone dry. Scott's jaw was clenched, but his gaze was steady, proud. Kate looked down at her hands, flexing them as if remembering the weight of bodies carried through sand. I didn't save everyone. 12 didn't make it. I think about them every day. The Pentagon told me to disappear to protect the mission, to avoid scrutiny, to keep secrets buried. So I did. I took off the uniform. I tried to build a quiet life. She met their eyes. But the battlefield doesn't let you leave clean. It follows you. And now you know. No one spoke at first. Then Gray stood, awkward and unsure. Ma'am, you're why I signed up. I read the stories. I thought they were myths. I didn't think I'd ever meet the person behind them. Kate shook her head. Don't sign up for myths, sign up for each other. Hernandez stepped forward next, her voice trembling but strong. You didn't just save 23 lives. You're saving ours before we even get there. Scott's voice was quiet but carried. We waited 6 years for this moment. Thank you for not letting us die alone." Kate felt the knot in her chest loosen just a little. Hayes's expression softened the faintest, almost imperceptible shift. The room stood silent again, not with shock now, but with reverence. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night was clear, stars burning bright. Harrison broke the silence. 2 more days finished the mission. The medics lingered after the meeting, some shaking Kate's hand, others simply offering a nod or a look heavy with gratitude. When the room finally emptied, Kate stayed behind, staring at the empty chairs. Each one felt like a ghost of those she couldn't save. Hayes approached, her voice low. "You handled that well." "They deserve the truth," Kate said. Hayes nodded. "The Pentagon won't be happy, but sometimes the right thing and the easy thing aren't the same." When she was alone again, Kate stepped outside. The night air was cold, sharp, alive. She tilted her head back to the stars, letting the quiet settle in. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running. She felt present, still wounded, still haunted, but present. Tomorrow the final drills would begin. Tomorrow they'd test everything, and soon after she'd leave without fanfare. But tonight, under the vast Colorado sky, Kate Ryan allowed herself the smallest of victories. She had spoken, and sometimes speaking was the bravest act of all. Why did the training field feel too still, as if even the wind was holding its breath? The dawn broke pale and brittle, the air biting against exposed skin. Kate stood before the trainees, her boots planted in frosted gravel, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. This would be their final evaluation, a full-spectrum combat medical exercise, the kind of drill designed to break a person just enough to reveal what they were made of. She scanned their faces: Gray, Hernandez, Rodriguez, Patel, Scott. They were tired but sharpened by the last 2 weeks. They had seen chaos and risen through it. Still, she felt the fragile thread connecting them to their own confidence, and she knew how easily it could snap. "This is your last test," Kate said. "When the battlefield gives you chaos, you give it calm. When it gives you fear, you give it purpose. When it gives you loss," her voice faltered briefly, "you keep moving, because someone is counting on you." The speakers crackled with pre-recorded artillery fire, and smoke canisters hissed to life. The medics split into teams, moving quickly across the simulated village. Hernandez took command of Alpha. Scott coordinated Bravo. Gray handled evacuation logistics with a surprising maturity that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. For the first hour, the exercise went as planned. Triage under fire, simulated blood pooling on the training dummies, radio failures at critical moments. The medics adjusted, improvised, led. Kate felt a flicker of pride watching Hernandez calmly guide Rodriguez through a field amputation procedure on a mannequin, a moment that would have paralyzed her days earlier. Then the world shifted. A distant boom echoed through the valley, too sharp, too low to be part of the simulation soundscape. The ground trembled underfoot. For a moment everyone froze, glancing at one another. Kate's stomach knotted. That wasn't planned. Harrison's voice cut through her earpiece, tight and urgent. "Ryan, we've got a real-world situation. Fuel truck overturned on Route 71, explosion, multiple injuries. Civilian and military casualties. Your closest." Kate didn't hesitate. "Copy, redirecting all personnel." She turned to the medics, her voice snapping like a whip. "Exercise canceled. Real-world mass casualty. Gear up now." Adrenaline spiked through the group. Gray's hands shook as he tightened the straps on his pack. Hernandez swallowed hard, her eyes wide but steady. Scott locked eyes with Kate, an unspoken "I'm with you" passing between them. They piled into 2 Humvees, the engines roaring to life. Snowmelt sprayed under the tires as they sped down the mountain road, sirens wailing faintly from the distance. The base's orderly world blurred past, barracks hangars, the familiar landmarks of safety now a fading memory. As they approached the scene, smoke coiled into the sky. the acrid smell of burning fuel mixed with the sharp tang of winter air. The wreckage sprawled across the asphalt, a military fuel truck on its side, flames licking its undercarriage, two civilian vehicles crumpled like tin cans. The screams came next, raw, human, urgent. Kate jumped out first, scanning. "Establish triage," she shouted. "Rodriguez, secure that perimeter, watch for secondary fires. Hernandez, your primary triage. Scott, Gray, start extrication on the pickup." The medics moved without hesitation, their weeks of training snapping into place. Hernandez knelt beside a soldier with a shattered leg, her voice low and calm. Gray and Scott pried open a mangled car door with a crowbar and brute force, pulling a civilian free. Kate dashed to a second vehicle, flames threatening to engulf it. A young private was trapped inside, pinned by the dashboard. His eyes met hers, wild with terror. "Please," he gasped. "I've got you," Kate said, voice steady. "Stay with me." She called for a spreader tool, but the base rescue team was still en route. Improvising, she jammed a crowbar into the crumpled metal, leveraging her body weight. Scott appeared beside her, wordlessly lending his strength. The metal groaned, then shifted. Together, they dragged the private out just as the flames reached the cab. Behind them, Hernandez was applying a tourniquet to a civilian with an arterial bleed, her hands swift and sure. Gray, soaked in sweat, was directing a bystander to help move the less critical patients out of harm's way. Then a new sound, an ominous hiss, cut through the chaos. Kate's head snapped toward the overturned fuel truck. Fuel was leaking toward the burning wreckage of the civilian car. "Everyone clear back," she shouted. "Now." The medics scrambled to drag casualties farther down the road. Flames flared as the leaking fuel ignited, sending a wave of heat across the scene. A smaller explosion rocked the ground, knocking Kate and Scott to their knees. She felt the sting of gravel against her palms but pushed herself up immediately. Minutes blurred, applying dressings, securing airways, coordinating with arriving firefighters and EMTs. The medics performed as if they'd been doing this for years, not 2 weeks. By the time the fire was under control and the last casualty loaded into an ambulance, the adrenaline had begun to ebb. Kate stood at the edge of the road, chest heaving, watching the tail lights disappear into the dusk. Gray approached, his face streaked with soot. "Ma'am, we didn't freeze." "No," Kate said quietly, "you didn't." Hernandez joined them, wiping her brow. "Those drills, they weren't just drills." "They never are," Kate said. Scott stood a few feet away, staring at the smoldering wreck. When he finally turned, his expression held something between pride and sadness. "You saved another life today." Kate shook her head. "We did." Back at the base, Harrison was waiting. "The Pentagon's already aware," he said grimly. "They're spinning it as a routine response, but word's out. A civilian contractor leading medics through a live mass casualty rescue. The press is sniffing." Kate felt the weight settle again. "Let them sniff. The medics saved lives, that's the story." "That's not the story the Pentagon fears," Harrison muttered. That night Kate sat alone outside the barracks, the mountains looming like silent witnesses. The air was cold enough to sting her lungs, but she welcomed the bite. It grounded her. Footsteps approached, and Scott appeared, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her one. She accepted it, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. For a while they sat in silence, the base's distant hum the only sound. Finally Scott spoke. "What happens when you leave, when they make you disappear again?" Kate stared at the dark horizon. "You keep doing what you did today, you keep them alive." He studied her profile, the flicker of starlight catching the edge of her scar. "It's not enough." "It has to be." They drank their coffee quietly, the steam rising like small ghosts into the night. Inside the barracks, Hernandez and Gray spoke in hushed tones. "She's going to vanish again, isn't she?" Gray asked. Hernandez nodded sadly. but she's left something with us that won't vanish. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors beat against the thin mountain air, a sound that, for Kate, would always be equal parts hope and heartbreak. She whispered to herself, too softly for Scott to hear, "Storms always find their way home." Why did the base lights look dimmer tonight, as if the mountain shadows themselves were closing in? The news spread faster than wildfire, faster even than the storm Kate had once outrun. By morning, the medics knew. Not just the trainees, word had reached the motor pool, the pilots, even the cooks. A whisper followed her through every hallway, the desert angels leaving. Kate walked toward the hangar where Harrison and Hayes were waiting, each step deliberate, each breath measured. Her duffel was slung over one shoulder, the same duffel that had carried blood-soaked bandages through Helmand. The sky above was a deep, endless blue, unmarred by clouds, a cruel contrast to the heaviness in her chest. Outside the hangar, the trainees gathered, Gray, Hernandez, Rodriguez, Patel, and the others. Their boots scuffed the gravel nervously, but their spines were straight. They weren't recruits anymore. They were medics shaped by fire. Hernandez stepped forward first. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "Ma'am, thank you for teaching us how to fight for lives." Gray followed, words catching in his throat. "You didn't just train us. You showed us what it means to not give up, even when giving up seems easier." Kate's throat tightened. She wanted to tell them she wasn't a hero, that the men she'd lost still haunted her every night. But she saw the steadiness in their eyes, and she knew some truths didn't need to be spoken aloud. Scott was last. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he stepped closer, holding out a folded scrap of fabric, an old, weathered armband he'd kept since Helmand, a silent token of survival. "It's yours," he said quietly. "You earned it that day." Kate hesitated, then took it gently, feeling the roughness of the fabric between her fingers. "We all earned it," she said. "Every breath you take out there, every life you save, that's the real tribute." Harrison cleared his throat softly. "Time to go, Captain." The title stung, both a wound and a gift. She nodded, then turned back to the trainees. "The battlefield doesn't care who you are. It only cares that you keep moving when it matters. Promise me you'll move." 12 heads nodded. 12 promises were made. As she walked toward the waiting transport, the base fell quiet, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. Even Hayes, always the composed general, stepped forward briefly. "You did good work here," she said, voice low. "Better than we deserved." Kate offered a faint smile. They deserved better than secrecy. Hayes inclined her head but didn't argue. Inside the transport, Kate settled her duffel beside her. Through the small window, she could see the trainees still standing in formation, their figures shrinking as the vehicle pulled away. Scott's silhouette lingered the longest, his hand lifted in a silent salute, not for rank, but for gratitude. The mountains blurred past as the convoy wound its way down the highway. Snow clung stubbornly to the peaks, sunlight turning the ridges to silver. Kate leaned her head back, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, the silence inside her wasn't suffocating. It was clean. Memories rose unbidden. The sandstorm's howl, the weight of broken bodies in her arms, the moment she'd thought she wouldn't make it back. And then Scott's voice in the wreckage, weak but certain. "You're the angel in the storm, aren't you?" She had answered him then with only action, not words. Maybe that was enough. Hours later, far from the base, Kate stopped at a roadside overlook. The wind was fierce at this altitude, whipping her hair across her face. She stood there for a long time, watching the world stretch wide and endless below. She thought of the 12 medics stepping into a future of chaos and impossible choices. She thought of the 23 lives she had saved, and the 12 she hadn't. She unfolded the fabric armband Scott had given her. The edges were frayed, the color faded. She pressed it to her lips, then tucked it carefully into her duffel. Somewhere behind her, a Blackhawk thundered across the sky, rotors chopping the air. The sound wasn't just noise anymore. It was memory and warning and hope, all tangled together. Kate turned back to her jeep. She didn't know where the road would lead. Another quiet town, another false name, another attempt at peace. But she knew she wouldn't stop teaching, even if it was one medic at a time, even if her name was never spoken again. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, she whispered into the wind, "Stay alive. All of you, stay alive." Back at Fort Carson, the medics lingered on the training field long after she was gone. Hernandez wiped at her eyes and muttered, "We'll carry her lessons." Gray stood quietly, fists in his pockets. Scott finally broke the silence. "She didn't need a medal," he said. "She didn't need a parade. She just needed to know someone would carry the torch." They looked toward the mountains, the last light fading over the peaks. None of them spoke again, but in the hush they felt her presence, steady, fierce, unbroken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.